So you may have heard of something in America called the SAVE Act. This has been going around. Elon Musk has, promoted this on X and Twitter, uh, talking about how this is going to save America. This is the act that requires, in most cases, the federal election, the general election, that citizens are required to show proof of verification, meaning that they need to verify their citizenship in order to vote, provide a photo ID or whatnot. Which, as a Canadian, and I'm going to show you how in Canada we have this system in place. We have, a verification process that, only eligible citizens are allowed to vote. In some circumstances, that is not always the case. We, need to scrutinize that more, especially now with the onboarding of all these refugees and migrants pouring into the country of Canada and the United States. But it's kind of amazing that the United States hasn't already implemented this kind of scenario. We know that Democrats, particularly within the establishment, don't want to recognize this because it's going to hurt their chances at the ballot boxes, especially bringing in these people and giving them the perks and privileges of, buttering them up and saying, oh, well, here's a $1,000, Visa card and stay at a 5-star resort. So, you're going to vote for us, right? So they're not sitting well with this, but let's dive into this factor. So this is from the Bipartisan Policy Center saying 5 things to know about the SAVE Act. And it says this piece refers to the SAVE Act as introduced in January of 2025. The Save America Act, passed by the U.S. House of Representatives on February 11, 2026, includes both the documentary proof of citizenship requirement outlined below and a requirement that voters provide a photo ID in order to vote. Introduced by Representative Chip Roy, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE, requires voters to provide documentary proof of citizenship at the time of registration. Both parties agree that voter registration should permit all eligible citizens and only eligible citizens to register and vote in federal elections. Also, although instances of non-citizen registration and voting are rare, the SAVE Act's goal of ensuring that only citizens can register to vote is important. But there are easier and more cost-effective ways to improve citizenship verification that don't create new barriers for eligible voters. Here's what you need to know about requiring proof of citizenship to register and vote. So they break this down to say citizenship is already a requirement to vote, and instances of non-citizen voting are rare. Many eligible citizens don't have access to documentary proof of citizenship. So this is what a lot of the Democrats, a lot of establishment. I'm not blaming all the Democrats, but a lot of the establishment, let's just say, as you kind of hear it on both sides. This is their excuse of saying that, well, there's certain people that can't obtain proof of citizenship, which that is hard to fathom. That's hard to imagine that you're telling me that if someone came into this country and they have visa or they have the eligibility to be in the country, you're telling me that they can't obtain some documentation to prove that they're allowed to vote or they're allowed to, how crazy is that? You're telling me that none of these people can obtain a driver's license, none of these people can obtain some sort of indication, whether even if it's a student card or even if they bring their visa to say, hey, this is the U.S. government, I'm eligible to be a student here, this is proof of documentation. They can't do that. I don't understand the thought process to say that, oh, well, they can't do that and that's racist. That's their go-to, is that it's racist to have ID requirement to make sure that citizens of the country are allowed to vote. It just seems so crazy. You're telling me that people don't have the ability to get ID, and we're going to show you all the other instances where you're required to have an ID, but no one calls that racist. There are better ways to verify citizenship that put the responsibility on the government, not voters. The SAVE Act could be intended consequences for election officials and election administration. The SAVE Act needs more time, resources, and well, um, in effect, the SAVE Act introduces a documentation requirement for a law that has existed for decades, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996 explicitly prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections. To do so, the SAVE Act amends the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 by introducing a requirement for individuals to prove U.S. citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. Registration and voting attempts by non-citizens are routinely investigated and prosecuted by the appropriate authorities, and there's no evidence that these attempts at voting by non-citizens have ever significantly enough to impact any election's outcome. In fact, there is ample evidence to indicate that registration and voting by non-citizens is few and far between. So I can understand that. And I think that, when people talk about voter fraud, because that's the big thing, they want to tackle voter fraud. And what I say to people that it's not necessarily voter fraud that's an issue. Voter fraud is very, very rare and usually is dealt with within the manner. It's not a big scandal as people want to believe. What is a scandal and what needs to be held to account is election fraud. And we have seen this throughout the process, going back to, George W. Bush and Al Gore, that election outcome that never really had a proper investigation. What really did happen in Florida, that they stopped counting the votes and allowed George W. Bush to magically become president. There's that. There's also the fact they cheated Bernie Sanders twice at the Democratic nomination. That never got investigated. That's election interference. That's an election fraud. They also don't mention about, how they twisted votes for 2016 for Hillary Clinton. And they also did it for 2020. And they also did it for a lot of different instances. Even, when you look at state ballots, that it's not the voters' fault. People voted according to the law. They voted in accordance with the law and they're eligible to vote. But we don't know what happens behind the scenes when those ballots are being cast and sent to these shadowy organizations that could easily manipulate the vote. And we've seen this constantly. So, yes, I understand what they're saying here. But I still agree that there should be some sort of measure, identification that has the ability to have proper ballot initiative that we can allow eligible people to vote. I'd also say that paper ballots need to be brought back, that these electronic devices that could easily be hacked into and manipulated, and we don't know exactly what companies are involved with this. Some have stated Venezuela as being an example of that. We don't know for sure, but we don't know about these electronic doodads that are supposed to track down our vote, our votes that elect a certain president or a certain policy or whatnot. So, yes, I think voter ID needs to come back into the United States and all over the world. Definitely needs to go in the United States. And also, paper ballots need to be a thing. And I'm not the only one that's saying this. Here's Kevin O'Leary. Now, I genuinely disagree with a lot of things of Kevin O'Leary. This is not me, validating him and saying, how great he is, Mr. Wonderful. But, they say a broken clock is right twice a day. And here's where Kevin O'Leary is actually kind of right about this and really stuns the CNN audience, because the CNN audience, just like the rest of the establishment, is on board to say how racist it is, how certain minorities aren't able and eligible to get identification, which is absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. You're telling me that you don't have any documents that have your name, address, and phone number telling you that you are a citizen, that you are located where you are? Crazy. So here's what he says that stunned the CNN panel here.
Every metric, every 24 months, we go through this debate over and over again. When every country in the Nordic countries in Europe, France, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, solved this problem decades ago. A, you got to be a citizen to vote. You got to prove it. We all agree at the table on that one. Number two, there's such advancement in technology to make sure there's no cheating. We should implement it here and get all this crapola over with. It's getting almost boring every 24 months. Oh, the election's rigged. Oh, this guy's doing this guy's doing that. No other country has this narrative.
Kevin,
Nobody.
I agree with you. It is getting
It's
incredibly
ridiculous.
boring. We talk about this all the time. It's incredibly boring, but it's also not an actual problem. Like when you look at the statistics, voting, illegals voting is not an actual problem in this country. You do need to show
But
ID
you agree,
to be
if
able
you're not
to
a
vote.
citizen,
It is
you
0.
can't
Point,
vote.
I
Yeah,
would
we agree with that, but
absolutely
let
agree
me
with that,
help
but that's
out.
not what the problem is.
Gotcha.
The problem is that we have 0.001% of people that are illegally voting. The Heritage Foundation said that 3 related fraud cases since 2017. The Brennan Center for Justice says there's 100 confirmed instances since the 1980s. This is not a real problem. The problem the Trump administration is trying to solve is that they are not doing well. They are not going to do well in the midterm elections, and they are coming up to it to find a reason.
Yes or no?
But that's not the question.
It's already illegal.
No one is doing it.
I love how they just can't help to make this, they have to show their bias. They have to show, well, this is only because the Trump administration is going to fall behind in the primaries and the midterms are not looking well for them. So obviously this is why it's coming out. The fact of the matter is, I agree with Kevin O'Leary on that, yeah, all these countries, Canada, Mexico, all these Nordic countries, they all have these measures to make sure that it's only eligible citizens that are allowed to vote, and they have paper ballots. They have security measures to make sure those ballots are secure. And we need to keep tabs on that. We need to hold them account to make sure that those ballots are secure. What's happening in America and why this is happening, it's not because of one party versus the other. It's because the entire system is trying to undermine the ability to vote. That's the whole thing. They're trying to undermine democracy through this. That's why they're bringing in all these, foreigners from different areas, pouring them into the country. That's why, in instances, they cut back on ballots timing in different states. They cut back on the eligibility for people to cast ballots. That's why they're not doing paper ballots. Like, why is that such a, dastardly thing? Why are we going to electronic ballots that literally an 11-year-old girl was able to hack through and access? That was a publication in PBS. They reported on that. That an 11-year-old girl was able to bypass a federally regulated voting machine. Whereas a paper ballot, it's a little bit harder to do that. A little bit harder to do that. And no other country is doing electronic voting. No other country, is saying that, oh, we can't have voter ID because it's racist. But why in America? Why in America? Oh, that's right, because they want to undermine the whole democratic process. The democratic process is already undermined to begin with. Like, you're talking about two sides of the same coin. So really, electorally, there's no difference. But this is how they're doing it. That's why they kicked out 250,000 New York ballots when it came to the Democratic primary. Because they knew that people were going to vote for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, at the time, was the most popular politician. So they had to undermine democracy. That's why. That's why. And of course, CNN's not going to go down that rabbit hole because they have biases. They want to make sure that their candidate wins. They want to make sure that the status quo still remains. And we don't want to give people a voice because, oh my God, that would mean that we have to change our reporting. That would mean that we're going to be held accountable. So here is Donald Trump on Air Force One. He was asked about this, and listen to his response.
The
very unhappy that there's a movement for getting voter ID. They want voter ID. The population, 98%, want voter ID. They don't want voter ID because they want to cheat in elections. They also want other things. They don't want mail-in ballots. They want to end mail-in ballots, which is corrupt. And one other thing that they're insisting on is proof of citizenship. And the Democrats don't want to give proof of citizenship. They don't want to give voter ID. Think of it. Who wouldn't want proof of citizenship? I ask you, Steve. Who wouldn't want voter ID? And why would you want mail-in ballots if you know it's corrupt? It's a corrupt system. We're the only country in the world that has this system of mail-in ballots. Think of it. The only country in the world that has this system of mail-in ballots, because they cheat. And the fact is they could never get elected if they ever changed. They know it. If you had voter ID, if you had proof of citizenship, they could never win an election. And they know that, and they're fighting to the hill. And I put this down with men playing in women's sports. I put it down with transgender for everybody. I put it down with their horrible open border policy as being ridiculous. They don't want voter ID. No voter ID. And I put that down in the same category with men playing in women's sports.
Okay, I don't know why that's the same category, but you get the picture there. Like, I agree with that 100%. Like, why is this such a controversial issue that majority of other nations, all have some sort of measure to make sure eligible citizens have the ability to vote because they show some sort of documentation. And I don't understand why it's such a big such controversy that people don't have documentation. You're telling me that they can't, again, and I want to show people this. So here's a big list here. It says when valid IDs are required. So here's all the things that everyday people have to have some sort of identification to manage everyday life. And it goes on to say driving, boarding an airplane, purchasing a car, getting a car registration, renting a car, boat, jet ski, buying insurance, train tickets, obtaining a passport, picking up mail from FedEx, post office, UPS, renting tools, donating blood, applying for a job, applying for school, applying for professional license, getting married, joining the military, adopting a child, transaction in a bank, sending a wire transfer, online banking, store credit, having a utilities account. Look at all this. Getting a credit card, opening a retirement account, applying for a mortgage, buying a house, applying for apartment rentals, renting a hotel, going to court, buying a cell phone. Look at you're telling me that these people don't already have some sort of identification to do all this stuff, that they can't get voting. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It does not make sense. It makes sense that you want to undermine democracy as a whole, hence why you're just making a laughingstock about the safety and security of ballot measures and why they're just an absolute joke. And, you know, as much as I want to get this passed, because it does make sense, it makes the most logical sense, just from any standpoint, we know that the entire system is corroded. It's corrupt. That electorally, you're not going to get your way out of anything. So, but this is crazy. This is crazy. There's more. Look at this. Using pawn shops. I didn't realize that was a thing. Yeah, they have valid ID to go to a pawn shop. Entering a nightclub. Volunteering. Buying cigarettes. Buying liquor. Visiting a casino. Like, how much more proof do you need for people to really sink into the fact that, no, it's not racist to demand identification, considering the fact that all these activities require identification, not because we're segregating people or bigoting people, but because they need validation. You need to prove that, okay, you are the person that you're claimed that you're picking up for, or you're renting a car to this person. Okay, we just need some sort of identification to prove that you are who you are. Again, these are the same people that want biometric data on the internet. You know, if you want to access YouTube, you got to do a biometric scan. You want to open up a bank account, we need to show your face. We need to take a selfie. You're telling me you can't do that for voting? You can't have any identification for voting. That's so crazy. So crazy that all the other countries in the world have this. Full or partially democratic countries that require ID to register to vote or cast a ballot on election day. These are all the countries. Look at this. Nordic countries, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, Switzerland, Finland, Austria, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Greece, Panama, Hungary, Colombia, Dominican, Romania, Serbia, Hong Kong, Ecuador, Albania, Fiji, Haiti, Iraq. Even these Muslim countries that, you know, are full of dictators and terrorists, they require IDs. They require IDs. But guess who doesn't? The United States. Because they're the rebel nation, right? They're the rebel nation. They don't do what the rest of the world wants, because the rest of the world's they're just crazy. And look who else. Look who else requires voter ID. I don't know if you can see it there. Israel. Oh, that's right. Your good buddy Israel. So your allied nation has healthcare, education, siphons tax dollars away from the rest of the world to prop up their civilization, and they have voter ID, but the United States doesn't. Make that make sense. Here's a little graphic here that someone put out here. It says, don't let Trump cheat. Demand voter ID and proof of citizenship, paper ballot, in-person voting, same-day results. Like how simple they can make this. But the purpose of why they're not doing it is because they don't want to make it simple. They don't want democracy to be a simple process. They want to make it so rambunctious, so annoying, so colluded, but this, that, and the other, that's going to deter people away from participating. That's all it comes down to. They don't want people to participate. Because I'm pretty sure if you mandated this, and actually got leaders that are willing to do the bidding for the American public, like Donald Trump was supposed to do before he got bought out by Israel, like Bernie Sanders was supposed to do before he got cucked into the rest of the Democratic establishment. If you got actual leaders that are willing to stick their neck out and have these measures in place, do you know how many of the non-voters would actually come back to participate because they don't see democracy as a joke? That's a way to actually encourage people to vote. Not just having celebrities go on cameos and say, vote! You got to do your Democratic dude, vote! Because, you know, when celebrities do that, doesn't mean vote your conscience, doesn't mean actually go out and participate how you exercise democracy. They're telling you to get into the club. Get into the club. You vote the way we want you to vote. And if you don't vote that way, then we're going to demonize you. But it's as simple as that, folks. And here, I just want to show, this is a sample ballot, or a registration card, if you will, of here in Canada. Now, the Canadian election, granted, especially this past last year with Mark Carney's election, has been really shaky when it comes to election fraud and needs to be scrutinized. But this is how our setup is, and this is how simple it can be. So you go online and you register to get this voting card. But in order to register for a voting card, you have to prove you're eligible. You have to say your name. You have to put in your address. You have to put in phone numbers. You have to prove. And it says right here, voter information card, federal by-election, Monday, September 16, 2024. To vote, you must be a Canadian citizen. You must be at least 18 years old on election day. Prove your identity and address and have lived in the riding since a certain time period. It's that simple, folks. It's that simple, folks. And if you can do that, you will get this registration card. And what you do is you take this card. They usually mail it to you. And you take that card. When you go to cast your ballot, you take that card and some sort of official ID, whether it be a driver's license, a health card, a passport, whatever the case may be, to just identify that, okay, this card lines up to your actual identification. And then you go and cast your paper ballot. It's as simple as that, folks. I don't know how to make it any more clear. But yet, in America, it seems to be this troublesome drama that, oh my God, people can't get IDs. Why? You're undermining democracy. No. Silly. The whole reason they're not doing it and not allowing voter ID is to undermine democracy. That's why. And having a voting ID system like this, even if it is like the Canadian system or French or the UK or whatever country, again, go back to this here. All the countries that partake in some sort of ID to register, if you just mimic one of these countries, you'd have better outcomes. People have better faith in democratic institutions. Right now, they don't. Right now, they don't. And I'm not saying that this is going to be a win of success, because we know how corrupted these institutions are. We know how politicians are bought. But you definitely give more of a chance to having some faith, some sigh of relief from participants if you have this in place. And majority of the country is on board with it. Majority of the country's on board with it. The only people that aren't on board with it are the certain politicians that benefit from not having eligible citizens vote. That if they bring in a certain amount of migrants and treat them to, hotel stays and give them $1,000 Visa card, then sky's the limit for them. They bought them. They bought votes using your tax dollars, by the way. So that's incredible. That's incredible. So hopefully, I don't know any updates on the SAVE Act, but let's hope this goes through, because it should be a simple process. And I can't believe it has to be this controversial for something that the rest of the world already participates. And nobody's freaking out about how racist that is in other countries, but just in the United States. Just like the rest of the world has some sort of basic health care, and the United States doesn't. And the United States makes excuses about, well, if we give people basic health care, then they're going to go to the doctor, and I don't want to pay for, someone to go to the doctor and make themselves feel better. Do you hear any other country talking that way? Do you hear any other people talking that way in different countries? I don't think so. Not even Canadians will say that. And basic Canada healthcare is on a downward spiral. They're not going to give it up for American healthcare. That's for sure.